I've written a book this last autumn. It's my fourth book actually, and one of those books has been translated to Slovenian, I suppose.
One for democracy.
Yeah, exactly. That was a defense, written defense for the. That was a written defense for this trial situation. But this book is about animal rights and autonomy. As somebody who has campaigned for animals, it would be sort of a natural approach to animal care or animal activism via suffering of animals. Suffering is sort of obvious, you can feel with it, and it's a motivation for doing things. But this book is completely a different approach. The approach is via my friendship to my dog friend. Under civil law, animals are property. Since 2012, feeling property, but they are property. And that means they have in principle no rights. Even if there are protection laws, they are actually protecting a cultural interest and not an interest of an animal, because animals have no interest. They can be possessed, they can be owned. Politically and judicially, they have no interest, and there's no legal standing for them in trial. So if the police fails them, if the protection laws are not executed, then they're just left in the rain. In practice, actually, it means, for example, that if I walk with my dog friend over a zebra crossing, where I have the right of way, he actually hasn't. And if he's 5 meters in front of me, the car could drive him over, and it's my fault or his fault, but not the driver's fault, because it's like putting a chair on the zebra crossing, and this is my fault. I shouldn't leave property there. And he doesn't feel like being property. So for him, he actually sees me walking on the zebra crossing, and he walks there as well, expecting to be treated similarly. And being property, he is not. For humans, we have basic rights. They should protect us for utilitarian weighing between suffering and necessity. And therefore, for example, in the Animal Welfare Act, we have a minimizing suffering idea. So if it's necessary, then we can let animals suffer. The EU directive on vivisection says even that the painless death is of no damage. They say one should weigh the damage, the loss and the gain in vivisection, and the painless death is no damage. They say it's morally irrelevant. This is a EU directive from also the highest sort of level. Also, hunters argue like that, and vivisection obviously the same. They say one suffers so that lots don't have to suffer, which is why we do this. And hunting, euthanizing sick animals. So the whole approach to animals is colored by this idea that we need to minimize suffering. There is suffering and that's a bad thing, and we need to minimize that. We need to reduce that. In practice, that can have very strange, for me at least, very strange aspects. A university professor in Vienna was an expert witness at our trial. And there was the question, if somebody opens the cage of a mink and the mink runs into the wild, is this animal abuse? Does the mink suffer more in the wild or more in the cages? And this professor said, I measure the stress hormones, and the stress hormones is the only indication of suffering, and the stress hormones say if the animal is in a cage and knows to expect at that time food and has always enough water, then the whole stress hormones level is smaller than in the wild, where they're constantly looking for food, constantly being threatened. So they say wild mink suffer more than caged mink. So it's better to cage them. This is what this guy said, 2011. Another university professor, Troxler, was asked if you open a pig factory's door and the pigs can walk out and then be on the meadow, in the green, in the grass, in the sun, do they suffer more or less than being crammed inside there with this gridded floor and no green and no windows and all these aspects of intensive farming? And this university university professor says, I measured the hormone level, and they suffer more outdoors. And why do they suffer more? Because they meet alien pigs, they squeeze through this small door in walking out, and that stresses them. And so the stress factor says they suffer more outside than inside. This is university professor talk. And the animal protection minister wanted to, unfortunately he stopped it, wanted to increase the stocking density, so the number of animals in such a broiler or turkey unit, and says in order to compensate for that higher density there, which is slightly more stress, compensate, we're looking at the feet of these animals when they're killed in the slaughterhouse, and they call it animal welfare indicator. They look at the feet, and if it's as small as that, the injuries from standing in their own excrement all day long, then you can put more animals into the shed. If it's medium-sized wounds, then you can leave it like that, that's fine. And if it's major wounds, then you need to reduce the stocking density. This is new welfare as in the view of this animal protection minister. This is where this kind of utilitarian approach to animals is actually going to.
And you actually have this in Austria.
What?
The minister for...
This is fact, yeah? This is how it happened. But we stood up, we said, no, Mr. Minister, or Mrs. in the meantime, and we did activity, we did a campaign, and they removed it. They don't do this now. So we stopped that. It became fact in 16th January this year, that the minister publicly announced they're not going to do it because of resistance by us. But this is what they claim to be a good move towards animal welfare and animal protection. So what is wrong with cages, with high stocking densities, with painless death? If I look at myself and if I look at humans, then what I want is to climb rocks, I want to climb in ice falls, I want to sleep in the snow, I want to do ski mountaineering, and I want to meet bears in the wild. And this is all dangerous and stressful. I was in an avalanche. I also had a rock fall on me while doing rock climbing, and it smashed up my shoulder completely. It was a very life-threatening situation. I met this bear. I met a number of bears already, but I met this bear face to face. He was just 5 meters in front of me, and I took that picture in the night. And I want that. It is stressful, and I want that. So stress, and is this minimizing suffering? Wouldn't it be better from the point of view of suffering that I sat in a dark room with a temperate atmosphere and nice music, and I just mellow, look at the oblivion? No, I want stress. I want to go out and do things. I want to be outside of a cage because I want to decide what I do. I have autonomy, and I don't want anybody to come to me and say, no, we reduce your suffering. No, I do want to suffer, and I want to decide that myself. So this is why I claim for myself a right. And I say it's the basic right of autonomy. Leave me alone. Leave my space. I can decide things for me, and I want to decide things for me. None of your business. Okay, but does that apply to animals? And that's the crux. I started to realize over the decades that autonomy is nothing we apply to animals. Animals can feel, they can feel pain or happiness, it is claimed, but they can't decide anything. This is sort of from the inside, it's sort of upwelling instinct. Do that, and then the animals run and do that. And sometimes they suffer when they do this, and sometimes they make them happy, but generally this is just driven. They never decide anything, they never contemplate, they never sit still and think, this are the options, let's do that. This would be reason, and reason doesn't apply to animals. When I wanted to write my book, the publishers asked me, what is it going to be about? And I said, this. I hadn't written it before I signed the contract. And they said, so what are you arguing? And I said, I'm going to argue that animals have reason and autonomy. And I said, no, animals have no reason and autonomy. And I said, okay, they have. And I argued, and then eventually they signed this contract with me, and I could publish that book. But it is true. The more I look, and if you talk with these professors, Hackländer and Troxler, and I say, but these pigs went out themselves. They decided themselves to go outside. So why don't you respect that? Why do you say it would have been better for them to stay inside? If you open the cage of a mink, they will walk out, and they will walk into the wild, and they won't sit in a cage and say, close it quickly. So why don't you let them decide it? And they say they don't, they are driven by instinct and we know better. Paternalizing, saying we know better. We minimize your suffering, you're just a stupid idiot who doesn't know anything. So I approach this question now by looking on my life together with this dog friend, Kuksi. Does he have autonomy? Can you say a dog has autonomy? This is when I met him. So the book, the biggest part of the book, is about our friendship. How it developed, what we experienced when we ran through the wilderness, all the things we saw and how I and he interacted, and I tried to present a case that he's an autonomous being. This is how I met him. He was a few months old. He was in a shelter. He had been chained to some lamp post in a motorway rest station, and he was brought into a shelter. And I just had come out of prison, and I knew how it was sitting in these shelter prison cells. And I wanted to take another person who is innocent out of such a cage. So I took him and did a test walk. We walked firstly for 5 days in the northern part of Lower Austria. We walked 5 dogs, 4 people, and had a nice time, and we just fell in love with each other. And yeah, from then onwards, we shared our life. This is him jumping into the Northern Sea. We then went up to Scandinavia, and last summer we were in the Russian taiga, in the Siberian taiga together, and we just get together and just walk for a month, completely equal. He decides where we go, I decide where we go, we just make it up together, and we decide our rules, we decide the route, we decide when we rest, and I have no more saying than him. At first, I was wondering, there's a young dog, a child, you need to educate children. So you go to dog school, and these major dog schools are dominance-based. They say, you must dominate this animal because it is an instinct-driven bio-machine that always wants to rule, and sort of is very rebellious. So you need to push him down. You need to be higher when he's eating. You need to be walking out first the door, and he might walk behind you. And all these, to me, very strange things. He's my friend. He's not my lower being. He's my friend, and who walks out the door is no concern. So I went to another school. So I actually never went into that school, but never mind. I went to another school, and there it was the non-violent animal training, they call it. Sounds nice. So we went there, and I was there for 3 hours, and then I gave it up. They gave me a little bag with lots of little dog sweets, and they said, always give him one when he is doing something you like, and ignore him, turn away and do something else if he's doing something you don't like. If you do that long enough, then he will keep doing what you like and not do what you don't like. And I started to say, why what I like? Why doesn't he do what he likes? I mean, if somebody came to me and said, here is a bit of chocolate, always I'm friendly, and or whatever I'm doing. And if I'm reading a book, then they give me chocolate because they don't want to be talked about. And if I say something, or if I say, it's hot here, then they ignore me. Then I say, okay, this is a very, very unfriendly approach. I don't want to do that to my friend and my life partner, because we spend day and night together, we sleep in the same bed, we do all our actions together, even in the night we are investigating battery farms together. He's very good in distracting guard dogs. We spend all our time together. It's my partner. I'm not telling him what to do, and I'm not shifting his brain. I'm not sort of messing with his brain and trying to adapt him to what I like. It doesn't matter what I like. It might be more difficult to be with an autonomous being who does what he likes, but he has the right to do it. Okay, so what we did now is I did no education. He's just a free being, and we just adapt to each other. We learn, he learns what I want, and I learn what he wants by living together, by looking at each other, by communicating emotionally, and we just arrange our social rules. This is where we moved to. This is our walks in the upper Styrian mountains. And yeah, we started to just walk in the wild there for a week and another week. And I realized that it's very different if you have a dog where you constantly must look what he is doing, like where can he go to the toilet and when, and you need to go with him, and that you decide when he's eating or not, or when he's walking out or not. And this civilization sort of forces on me to determine what he's doing. Out there, this is not so. We can let go, and we can be just really how we are. There is a number of aspects where you realize how important it is to understand what he wants, and that he is a being who wants things, because you come into problems automatically when you're in the wild. There might be a thunderstorm, you might not find any water. Sometimes we have been walking where I just leave all stuff behind, like him, and I have just this clothes on that I have. Not like him, he's nude, but never mind, I have clothes on. But I have no rucksack, I have no sleeping bag, and we just walk for 5 days. And if it rains, we sleep in the rain, cuddle up together. And we need to help each other then. He needs to warm me up, I need to help him, and because I see where the water is, for example. And in that way, we communicate, and I realize that I must understand him correctly, otherwise we wouldn't manage. And I will show you some examples of overcoming problems together. The communication is emotional. One example, we walk there and there's the snow drift over a rock face. And he's very young, walks out there. And I say, ah, go, come back, come back, come back. And he shrieks and then comes back. And I wonder, why did he come back? Did he understand my words? I said long sentences. I don't know. No, I don't think so. A little later, I walk with a young human. And he also walks out there, and he has no experience of mountains. And I shout, ah, come back, come back, come back. And it was a strong wind. And he came immediately back, very much like Kuksi. And I asked him, why did you come back? And he said, I haven't understood anything. But from your emotional screaming, I realized there's something very dangerous right now. And you are somebody who knows your way around there, and you wouldn't scream around for nothing. So I immediately changed what I did and came. And it must be the same for him. He realizes my emotions, and this is, interestingly enough, the complete contrary to what this funny school told me. The school told me, be unemotional with the dog. You stroke him only from the top of his nose to the end of his tail, and never only bit, and never cuddle him, and never say, woo, 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 and so, never be emotional. And if you do signs for sit, or stand, or run, or crack quickly, even that is a command I learned that you have to teach your dog. Do that in an unemotional way, because if you do it in an unemotional way, then it is a good sort of marker that you can recreate identically, and then it's easier for him. And I say the opposite, be emotional, show your emotions. You can speak or not speak, or wave your hands or whatever, but show your emotions, show when you're sad, when you're happy, show what you want from him by being emotional. And actually that works really well. Sure, kind of slide time. Okay, this is in northern Sweden, so really a nice wilderness. You can walk there for weeks on end without paths. We were there and about 50 kilometers away from the next road. And actually it's still those streams that determine where you can walk and where you can't. Because it's very hard to cross these streams. And if there are no humans, then there are no bridges, so you can't easily cross them. So, but if we have to cross them, because we have been walking along there and we want to go on the other side, then he's quite good in jumping rocks and then jumping over there. But if that doesn't work, he's so much smaller than I am and lighter, then I have to carry him across the river. And every decent dog hates to be picked up. I say, I'm not a child, I walk myself. But when there is a problem like that, when there's a river, and he understands very soon that we want to cross over, then he lets me lifting him up. If I try to lift him up now, you will see that he will get pissed off. But if I do that in front of the river and carry him over there, he's happily doing it, he's supporting me, he's trying to make it as easy as possible. When we were exactly taking that picture, I needed to cross the river, and the river was such a strong current I didn't dare carry him. I needed my hands to balance. So I emptied my rucksack and put him in the rucksack. Sadly, I didn't have a picture of that because I was walking. But he was in my big rucksack with his little head out there. And we walked across, and he let me do that. And if I came with a rucksack and tried to put him in there, he would never allow me to do it. So obviously, he's a being that understands things, cooperates if he wants to cooperate, and does not cooperate if he does not want to. So I couldn't actually force him, apart from, I don't know, violently, but like in a relationship, if he desperately does not want certain things to happen, then it will not happen. He climbs, he likes climbing on trees. I've seen foxes climb on trees like that too, and he seems to be very similar there, and he has a very good feeling of balance. And if we walk steep rocks, then he's sometimes much better. If it becomes too vertical, then not, but otherwise he's very good at doing this, and I trust him completely. Again, something that I found in this funny school, they say, oh, if a dog does this and that, you must always be under control and always look what they're doing and so. He knows much better when it's dangerous for him, and I trust him, and he does it, and it works. He doesn't fall off his trees. Yeah, one of the social rules that we have when we walk is that when he comes to sleep at my place, also not in the tent, he has always space in the tent, but if he wants to sleep at my mat with me, maybe on the sleeping bag or something, then my rule is I don't want you to be too dirty. He is somebody, for whatever reason, who just loves going and rolling around in some dead animal, in some shit of some and he smells very badly after that. And I said, oh God, we have to do that. So my suggestion was, our social rule is, you don't roll in these things. No. He was not having that. He said, I so much love rolling in those things that you have to bear the smell. Okay, then I said, then let's have the compromise. You roll whenever you like and wherever you like. But before you step into my sleeping bag or bed at home, then I clean you. And he says, okay. So now, when we, for example, when we walk in, we come in a cabin, and before he's going into the bed with me, he's standing underneath the shower and waiting for me to switch it on and cleaning him if he's full of shit. So yeah, this is a rule that we developed together. Another rule that was very important for me is that he doesn't hunt. I suffer so badly if he chases an animal or even bites the animal that I just don't want to have it. And what happens then is I don't reprimand him, I don't give him a penalty or something, but I act like in a relationship. I'm very pissed off and I say, no, I don't want to see you. This is something that I so disapprove of. I so suffer when I do this. Yeah? And I show him my emotion and show him how much I suffer. And the consequence is that he's completely stopped hunting. I trust him 100%. Just last weekend we walked a couple of days and there I saw it again. We went and there was a chamois coming, these badger face deer-like things. And they were coming and standing there. And he and me, we saw them and we walked on a bit and then they ran off. And so he ran over there and I didn't scream. When we walked there, I never shout, come here, leave that, do this, do that, never. He does what he likes, I do what I like, and we arrange together how we do this. And I knew that he would run where this animal was. He would sniff around there and then come back. He finds it very interesting, so sniffing things. And that's fine, but he never chases animals anymore. This is a rule he just completely adapted. Here we have stress. This is minus 15 degrees. We're climbing down a very icy rock slate, and it's cold. And it's cold for me, it's cold for him. Is that animal abuse? These two university professors would say definitely that's animal abuse. If you measure stress levels, you will probably have high stress levels, and how can you do this to him? He has this short hair braid, some mix of a hunting dog. Most likely he doesn't bear it very much. Actually, I found for humans as well as dogs, if they walk a lot in the cold, then they get very resistant, much more than if you are not used to this. There is a scientific explanation. There are certain kinds of fat cells that burn and produce heat, and you can train that, like you train muscles, you can train resistance against cold, and he's very, very resistant against cold, and me too, due to these experiences. But I can definitely say, I've asked him, and I can definitely say he wants to walk like that. And if there is a university professor coming that's never abused, he shouldn't do that, and I say you're wrong. He wants to walk like that. And I know that for a number of reasons, and one reason is that if we walk like that in the cold, as we often do in the winter, and we come back to the car to drive into the city, then he just refuses to get in. He walks 20 meters away and says, I'm not going in this car. I want to stay in the wild. And I say to him, no, you need to go back there. So we argue a bit, and then I sit with him and talk with him and tell him, you know, I'd love to stay, but you just can't. And then sometimes I can persuade him, then he comes into the car, sometimes he doesn't. And I say, you know, it's getting dark, we need to go. And then he just falls over and he's completely passive, and I need to drag him into the car. Passive resistance, civil disobedience, like I do in the political thing. And for the same reason, I do it politically because I don't want to have an aggressive conflict. I want to have a conflict where there is no enemy, where you can have a compromise solution. And he doesn't want us to fight. He just wants to make the point that he disapproved completely of having to leave home. And this he does in the winter as much as, or even more often than in the summer, even if we're in a white-out snowstorm. We spent 3 days in a snowstorm on the so-called Dead Mountains in Upper Austria, in the complete snow, sleeping out there, and he was beside himself for joy. He just loves that. If people ask me, what is the big difference between dogs and humans? They expect reason, free will, mental power, blah, blah, blah. My experience with him is no. We are quantitatively slightly different in some aspects, but qualitatively, the biggest difference between us is that he can go naked in the snow and I can't. Because he has an evolution history in northern areas where there is winter, while my evolutionary history is equatorial Africa. So I'm not used to winter, and my body hasn't adapted to that. I realized that when the last big snow came in April, maybe we close the door. If we just close the door, that's fine. Yeah, we used the last snow and went out of the tent for 4 days. There's 1.5 meters snow at falling in April still. And I was in this tent, enjoying myself, and he was there too. And then I needed a pee. And I thought, God, I need to put all the clothes on and all the shoes, I will do it naked. And I went out naked in so deep snow, so soft, deep snow. And you're freezing to death, essentially, because the skin tries to keep 37 degrees, and all the water melts and takes all your energy away and the heat away, and it's very hard to keep the neck warm. While he is standing naked in the snowstorm, because his legs are adapted, he has a system in his bloodstream that his feet can be 10 degrees cold, and he doesn't feel the cold, because there's a heat exchange system. So he is very much more adapted to the cold, and that's the biggest difference between us. All other differences pale in comparison. We also do ski tours. One of my non-violent animal trainers said ski tours are stress for dogs. They shouldn't do that because they need to run after you. You're with a ski, you're faster, they sink in, you don't, so this is stress poor. I can only say that it's not so. He's on four paws, so he distributes his weight. He can walk pretty well on snow. Sometimes he sinks in deeply, then he walks in my tracks, maybe as he likes, but he can very well deal with this. But there was one occasion when I skied down like this, and then I triggered an avalanche. But it was not a powder avalanche, so it was a wet snow avalanche, so they're slower. But nevertheless, it triggered this avalanche, and it caught him. And I was so shocked to see him, how this avalanche just took him and rolled him with it, and then he sank underneath him. And then he came up again. And I was skiing behind it in order to immediately take him out when this avalanche does something or stop. And then came a rock And the avalanche went to this rock, and he just came up again, and he could grab the rock, and then he could hold on, and then he stood on the rock, and the avalanche went on. And I just had him, and I realized he needs, like I have, a device that says where he is in an avalanche, so an avalanche emergency device. I wrote to all these companies, and none of them wanted to produce that for dogs. And eventually in 2012 a company did, and since then he has also this avalanche device here. But this company made sure that the frequency for this avalanche device is different than to humans, and they told me that's because if the mountain rescue comes, they should know who is a human to rescue, that's more important, and if there is a dog, that is the last one to be rescued. So it's a different frequency, and my receiver has a receiver for humans and a receiver for dogs. If you happen to walk with me, then don't expect to be rescued before me. I don't have the same hierarchy. We do a lot of tours in the winter, and it's very nice, and he also feeds himself. He doesn't hunt, but he finds a lot of food. He has a very good nose, finds a lot of food, especially in the springtime when there is many animals being killed by avalanches, and they just come up again. Sometimes they're so frozen that their blood becomes liquid again. And then if we find that, and we find that often, surely every day, then he eats there a lot. And I just wait with him. Sometimes we camp nearby so that he can meet this animal again on the next day.
Do you eat too?
No, I don't like that. I don't eat, but I don't like that. But he likes it, and he eats it. And I've also seen how he does that sort of thing. He cuts open the stomach and he takes out the intestines and eats them. Yeah, I don't mind, and this is his decision. Otherwise, he's vegan. So you can't expect from me to get non-vegan food, but out there when we walk, he can take his own non-vegan food. Now to some of our adventures. Here, for example, is an ibex, and you would have thought these are, firstly, not particularly threatening, and secondly, they are running away anyway, if you can. But not so. There are ibex, male ibex, 150 kilo guys who don't run away, especially if they're in areas where they're not hunted. This is a picture that I took of a wild ibex, and you can see that this guy is not more than a couple of meters away. And indeed, that happened once to us. Kuksi went over to sniff on that guy, and the ibex took that personally, and sort of bent his head down and sort of kicked Kuksi. And Kuksi was really scared and ran to me, and then this guy followed him. And I took a rock and tried to defend Kuksi and threw the rock in front of his feet, but that didn't impress him at all. And then, so I ran as well. And then came one of these little bushes, and I was behind the bush, and Kuksi between my legs, and on the other side this ibex, just a meter away. And he had this nose, and these dark eyes, and I said to him, just leave us, we haven't done anything, we don't mean any harm. I talked friendly to him. Then he walked around very slowly and friendly, looking around the bush, so I rather went on the other side of the bush. And then he walked the other way, and then we went this side. And then he gave up on us and just walked away. And I also think this is a humbling experience, you know, if you experience an animal that's just sort of not scared of you. As a human, usually we are these powerful, dominant, blah blah creatures. But there was a guy who felt, no, we are actually the weaker ones, and right he was. But the fact is that Kuksi learned his lesson, and when we now meet such guys, he doesn't actually go there so easily. Once we went down a very steep slope, and there were two of them standing at the only place where we could go through these rocks in order to get down. And we walked there, and they didn't move away, and Kuksi didn't want to go there and ask them, so he stayed with me. And then we were closer and closer, and this guy didn't move away, so I asked him, can we pass, or do you mind that? And then they let us pass, so we just walked by them, and they didn't move away, they didn't run away, nothing, they just stared at us, but they let us go. Another of these experiences is a meeting with this capercaillie. These capercaillies are powerful birds, but they're chicken-like, so you also would generally not be scared. But in autumn, no, in spring, March, April, they, whatever the word is in English, they try to find a mate, and then they stand a bit like this and have these red eyelids, and then they click, 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 click. And we saw one, there's also a wild one that we took a picture on the way, and we saw him, and I said, Kuksi, look, there is an interesting bird. You don't see them often, at least here in northern Scandinavia. They're far more often existing than in Central Europe. Anyway, and we saw him, and he didn't flee at all. He came closer. He was jumping like they do, and then click, 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 and jumping again. And then he came 10 meters closer, and I said, okay, it's the time when I leave. So Kuksi and I went away, but he wouldn't have it, and he started flying once around us and landed straight in front of me. And then he went for me, he attacked me, he put his claws up and his beak and just went for me. I don't know. He seemed to think that I am challenging him and wanting to take his mates away. Although he has much more pretty eyelids. But anyway, I thought this guy is going to cramp his claws into my thighs and it's going to be hard thing. And then Kuksi came from the side, shot by me and attacked him. And they just sort of got stuck in each other and sort of almost froze. And I supported Kuksi and went there and clapped my hands, and then he had enough, and then he flew off. And Kuksi was a bit injured, but I mean, he helped me. He immediately came and helped me without thinking twice. He came and helped me. Yeah, this is the kind of way that you can survive in the wild with partners. This is wolf tracks in southern Romania, in the South Carpathians. We went there in winter for a week, and then we came across these wolf tracks. These are 13 individual wolves, and we saw that on this meadow where they branched out, and we felt this is so interesting that we want to follow those tracks. So we just followed them, and it was very easy, because if it's coming steep, then they all go one line, so and all step into the same thing, and it's very deep step, and so you can easily follow that. You can't lose it. And we saw a lot of places where they slept, and where they played, and where they ate, and where they had a crap, and all these things, and you could sort of see their private life. And this was so interesting that we did that for 5 days. And usually Kuksi in the night, when we set up camp, then he walks out and sort of ambles around a bit. But during these days when we followed this wolf pack, then he wouldn't go out. Wolves are known to be, could be potentially lethal to dogs. And I saw that in the morning, the tracks of the wolves. They had come back to see who is hassling them. And they came in 50 meters distance once around the tent. And Kuksi smelled them. Kuksi was in the tent and didn't go out at all, and realized that they are here now, and that they look who we are and where we are and what we're doing. But then they left and did nothing to us, but they didn't also howl. In the summer we heard them howl, even 3 packs to each other. This is wolf track, and this is Kuksi's track, so it's better not to have a conflict with these guys. This is bear tracks. Here is his front paw, and then always the back paw on top of it. Yeah, when we're in the South Carpathians, we meet them. We have had more than 20 encounters with bears, but in Austria once so far. Most of them have been killed by hunters. But this is a picture that I took in the night, in the wild, of a bear close to us. In the night it's easier to take pictures of them because they don't run away as quickly, but they never threatened us so far. But they also never looked at me. With him, I see him immediately. His eyes are shining. But bears, I think if they look at you, then it's probably, you can't tell the tail afterward. Once I had set up, usually the night we put our food in a closed basket and put it up on the tree so that the bears don't smell and wouldn't come. But at that stage we had a fire and we were sort of putting our food together, and then suddenly a bear, this bear, came out of the bushes. And Kuksi stood in front of me, just a meter in front of me. This guy was as far away as the door maybe. And Kuksi stood in front of me, he came from the side, stayed in front of me and barked like mad onto that bear. So he himself with his 30 kilos threatened this guy with his 300 kilos to leave me alone back because he would be fast enough to run away. So I also found that very moving that he would risk his life and confront such a huge animal in order to defend me and to protect me. And indeed the bear decided to leave them. And although he thought so long about it that I had time to take a picture of him. A professor at the Institute of Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig in Germany says animals can't imitate, which I find really strange because parrots, aren't they so known for imitation? And monkeys. Do dogs imitate? I can say he definitely does. We went, when I for the first time ate these blueberries in front of him, he came with his nose and stood so close and looked exactly what I was doing because these berries are so small, aren't they? And then he did it himself. He sort of went through with his teeth and ate this berry. Since then he loves eating blueberries. If we walk and see a field of blueberries, you can't get us away there for another couple of hours because we both eat blueberries. And if we go and he's suddenly not there and I call him, hey Kuksi, where are you? And he's coming, blue mouth, and I know blueberries. So I just have to follow him. He loves blueberries. These are these multiberries which grow in the northern tundra. And they, when they are really bright red, then they are not ripe and stone hard and taste very awful. When they are like that, so yellowish orange, then they are ripe, then they're very soft and very liquid and they still taste awful. But you can get a lot of vitamin and a lot of fruity feeling from them, so we go there and collect them together. Here they grow on the floor, there's no trees in the tundra. And yeah, and so we eat these berries together as well. So definitely imitation. That is another of our encounters, this time with a bovine. This guy is a bull, 2 years old, and has been dehorned sadly. But these guys, if they live on a meadow, especially in the mountains, then they might be quite dangerous and attacking dogs, especially because they feel threatened or feel afraid for their calves. And we had a number of such encounters where it's very important that we cooperate well. And one of those encounters, maybe I tell you the story of, we went around the corner and suddenly there were these cows. We were suddenly amongst them. And this is sort of the worst case scenario, because if you see them in the distance, then you can avoid them. But they immediately saw us and came and surrounded us. So we were surrounded, Kuksi and I, back to back, and there are 50 cows around us with these horns. And they started getting fussy. So beside us there was a bush. We jumped into that bush, and so high, we were surrounded by these cows, and they started fighting amongst each other, which was a bit scary and felt like they wanted to be the first who can kill us. So we stood there for an hour, and Kuksi quiet, I quiet, and Kuksi felt I tried to distract him, and runs out and starts running around there. And I said, God, so many legs and so many horns, and they all run crisscrossing and he between them. And eventually he came back, but there was no advance. So we waited another hour, and then it was getting dark, and we wanted to get on out. We had no stuff with us, it wasn't there, we couldn't sleep in that bush, and the cows seemed to be happy with staying there overnight. So, so we needed a plan, and this plan was then that Kuksi stays back, and I try to get through those cows alone, and when I'm far enough away, then he will go out, and then we meet somewhere and run off. Because he's faster than them, so he shouldn't be the second to leave. So I went out of the bush and talked to them and started walking, and then they got a bit agitated and followed me and got angrier, and then I jumped in another bush 50 meters down. And I stood there, and Kuksi stood there, and in the middle of us were these cows milling about. And then plan B, I jumped out of the bush and screamed at the cows so that they would look at me, and then I shouted, Kuksi, now run! And then he went out of his bush and ran out there. And I ran in the opposite direction, and we ran, and suddenly we met behind those bush line and fled together, and we could escape those cows, and we had arranged all this. And I said that, I described it in the book, and I said that on a talk, and one of these university professors from the Clever Dog Lab said dogs are not as clever as that. It's a stupid dog, actually. So they train dogs and find out how clever they are, and apparently they are not. But he says, you can't arrange it with a dog. And I said, strange, if I couldn't arrange it, I would be long dead, because I need to be sure that I understand him and he understands me, otherwise we wouldn't overcome such hurdles. So indeed, apparently, to deal with an animal in a lab situation and outside in the wild with an autonomous being is a very different matter. If you have a dog, generally always on the lead, and if you always tell this dog what to do, sit, stand, walk, be quiet, crap, whatever, then this being becomes a very dependent being. They always look at you and say, what shall I do next? If you live with a dog that who can overcome problems on his own account, maybe at the beginning when he's young with your help, but after that in his own, then he becomes self-assured, and then he becomes capable to deal with other beings, capable to deal with problems, and then he becomes capable also of resolving such a situation. So this might be a difference. About arranging rules, one of the rules is games. When we play games, it looks as if he's very angry with me. I might also take him harshly and we fight over sticks, or we chase each other or whatever. I realized that for him it's important that these rules are fair. It shouldn't be that he loses all the time. He doesn't like that. So he actually has a sense of fairness. Indeed, if I tell him to give me his paw and somebody else gets a paw, another dog, and if this dog gets a reward for it and he doesn't, he gets pissed off. There is an experiment that showed it actually. So dogs have a sense of fairness, and I see that definitely with him, especially during play. One of our beloved kinds of play is a smelling game. Then I run off, he gives me 5 minutes, and then he follows my track, galloping along the line, and I run and he runs and he catches up. And he always is able to find me eventually. And I can see when he does that he's very, that it's a very hard intellectual task to follow a smell line. I do some tricks, obviously. I ran, for example, this street, and then I came exactly back the same road, and then I jumped into a river, ran back that river 5 meters, and then ran up the wood. And then I sat behind the tree and watched what he was doing. And I saw him coming this street, and just as he is full speed, and suddenly he realized no smell anymore. So he comes back and runs away, and again loses the smell. And then he really screamed angrily with himself, and then he went back, and then he went very slowly. Where? And he managed, here's the end of the smell, so he walks back. And then, here is something. Maybe the river, then he goes around the river. Then he crosses to the other side, smells along, back, he is on my track, and a minute, second later. So it's a very intellectual task. And so these are beings that are intellectual, they can resolve those tasks. Kuksi and traffic. I had another debate recently with these trainers, dog trainers. The city of Vienna now has official dog trainers that tell you what to do. Actually, they tell you never play with a dog. Seriously, this is one of their rules, because then the dog is stressed. Anyway, they said you can never leave a dog off the lead in a traffic situation. But then they should see me. I never have him on a lead, apart from police is watching. And so when we go, I can pass with him through the densest traffic. And he would always be very careful, stick with me when it's dangerous or not when it's not dangerous, and be a very sensible and reasonable being in the traffic. So he learned that without me giving him whatever click and commands, he started understanding traffic, and he does it now really very well. Also, I can ask him questions. Here we are in the city of Vienna on our way. I'm on my bicycle. I have this buggy where he can get in if he wants to. And I ask him, do you want to get in the buggy or do you want to run with me on the bicycle? The dominance people, they can't ask their dog. They can only tell their dog what to do. The violence-free educators or trainers, they can only click and then the dog does something, but they can't ask the dog anything. I can ask him. I can, with emotional talk, with hand movement, I can ask him, do you want to get in or not? And then sometimes he goes in and sometimes he doesn't. When I go jogging, He sees me putting the clothes on. I ask him, do you want to come with me? But if, then I will be running. So you have to be fast enough and don't have time for smelling. And 60% of the time he says, okay, then I stay home. He can decide that, and I can ask him that. And that proves to me that this is a being that you can ask, and you must understand that these are beings that can decide things themselves. And and they have values. There's values that they have developed, because without values there wouldn't be a reason to decide. You have 3 options, and then you compare them with your values, and then you do a certain option that best preserves your values. One of those values, or maybe the highest value, is the relationship. I understand for him that the relationship to me is the highest priority, and so he will try to choose options, even if it's running counter to his instinct or his whatever drive, that he will sort of keep back and do something else in order not to challenge our relationship, like hunting. When he would love to chase an animal, or maybe bite this animal, or kill him or her, he doesn't do that because he doesn't want to challenge our relationship. This relationship is the highest priority. And so I could say these creatures are actually, in some sense, moral beings. They can have moral decisions. If they understand social rules and create them together with you and give themselves values, then in this sense they are moral beings. But so, yeah, okay, I'll explain later what that means. But they're moral beings. I understand that also when you have the rule that he shouldn't go into the bed without asking me, because I want to check whether he has been up to his tricks in some shit of some animal again, then I asked him. And then once a number of people came and they were very noisy at our place, and he didn't like that. And then he went up and sat in the bed, and he broke deliberately the rule. And then I came up and saw him, and he said, sort of, he didn't duck down, he looked at me and said, if these noisy people are there, then I go and sit in your bed. So he can understand rules, he knows what breaching the rules means, and he uses that in our relationship. So these are beings that do understand those concepts, definitely. But the book also consists of natural science. I'm a natural scientist and a mathematician, and so I have a number of those things. And I want to take back up what I found in our intense relationship. And I want to show you a few of these now. This is a picture of Kuksi's brain, and this is my brain. And you see there is the brainstem, like both of us, and there's the cerebellum here, and then there's the limbic system where you have the conscious emotions, and then there is the neocortex that overruns all this and is very wrapped. And see, the dog has the same kind of neocortex. It's also the biggest structure in the brain. And with humans, they say, this is the instinct and drive that comes up and that gets into your conscious area, and you get a feeling, I'm hungry. There's hunger coming up, I'm hungry. This cerebellum area is where you have trained reactions. Like, for example, the taste for something. So this gives you hunger, and this gives you a lust for certain kind of food things. And here you experience that consciously. But then you have the neocortex that questions whether you want to actually do that, and where you can reflect on it and compare it with your values. And then you might say, no, I'm not following these sort of things. This is the brainstem of Kuksi, and the dominant school says this is the whole brain. Everything that the dog does is only driven by instinct, but this is the minor structure. And then the trainer people, these people that permanently give him something and give him commands, they use the cerebellum, the small brain, the cerebellum. In the cerebellum you have these automatic combinations, and they behave as if dogs only have a cerebellum, a small brain. But as a matter of fact, there's a neocortex, and why does he have that if not for thinking about things, for solving problems, for deciding things, how he would go on, and if he follows the cerebellum or not, or if he follows the brainstem or not. And so the dogs are very underestimated when it comes to that. A few more points. With dogs it has been shown that they have so-called mirror neurons like all other vertebrae have. And these mirror neurons are in the brain, parts of the brain that fire, If the animal or human observes an action or feeling with him or herself or with others. 1/3 of these neurons fire when they recognize an action, and 2/3 when they have an association with this. There is a number of feelings that have already been found. So mirror neurons help a creature to understand other creatures' intentions and actions. For example, I lift my right hand, and his mirror neurons fire and say there is somebody who lifts his right hand. Because they also fire when he himself lifts his right forepaw. So these neurons do that. But secondly, or the 2/3 of the neurons see me, for example, having pain. And so they fire, and he basically co-feels the pain in himself and realizes there's somebody feeling pain. So these mirror neurons give this, have this consequence. And they help to learn via imitation. And they've proven to be existing in dogs. And yawning is contagious. Yawning is also something that the neuron fire, the mirror neurons fire and tell it there's somebody yawning. And that makes you want to yawn yourself. And it works with dogs. I've tried it. I've yawned in front of him a few times, and then he actually does it himself. I also realized that this sort of imitation thing works with him. Like, I've tried it and it's not very nice. I did always what he does. Sitting how he sits, licking his lips when he does it. And he watches me doing this, and then he gets pissed off and leaves. So he realizes I'm doing what he does. So these mirror neurons tell him these sort of things. And they are the basis for empathy and moral feelings. So this basis is there. In principle, he can feel these sort of things. And so you can't exclude him completely when it comes to these things, like they do. I should say that briefly. I was at a lecture, a whole semester long lecture on animal ethics at the Veterinary University in Vienna. And there the lecturer, 2008, said animals are machines basically, and they are just driven by instinct or by whatever drives them, but they can't decide anything. They have no reason, they have no free will. This is the difference. And they also say they principally cannot feel empathy. And here we have a new natural scientific proof that this is not the case. There was also magnetic resonance scans of brains where they could prove that they have episodical memories, that they remember humans and other animals, that they can have positive associations with certain smells or aggressive associations, anger with certain smells, and also that they have the strongest reaction for unknown smells and the smallest reaction for their own smell. In other words, they can recognize their own smell. And physiologically, there is this hormone, oxytocin, which is the so-called love hormone, which these levels rise if you love somebody and are close to them and feel comforted and comforting them. So if you're close, and that works with the dog-human relationship as well. So basically, if I'm crying and Kuksi realizes that's why he has mirror neurons, and then he feels love and comes to me and comforts me and puts his head on my lap, then I feel comforted, and this is the oxytocin levels rise. And this works with him and with me, and we both have this reaction, and that has a lot of physiological reactions, like depression goes away, pain gets weaker, pain feeling, and you're sort of feeling happier and wanted in this world. And that works in a human-dog relationship, proven by scientific analysis. Actually, the highest oxytocin level ever found was between a dog and a goat. They two loved each other, obviously, and then they cuddled, and after an hour they had measured oxytocin levels 350% of what they normally have. And the scientists said not even, so loving couples, romantically involved couples with humans have that kind of levels as the dog and the goat had together. So the decisive word self-awareness. Do dogs have self-awareness? Isn't that something that only humans have? It is argued that in a mirror they don't recognize each other or they can't recognize themselves, and that shows that they have no self-image and therefore no self-awareness. But maybe they don't care about visual signals. my partner once was stung in the face with wasps and was totally changed face features so that I couldn't recognize her, and he didn't care at all. Her smell was the same, so how she looked like, he didn't bother. So maybe it's the smell that is more important, and he does recognize his smell, so is this not proof of his own self-awareness? Then also that he acts differently with or without the leash, a very different being, that he recognizes pain, comforting, that he has some sort of humor, that yawning is contagious. His humor shows, for example, in a car when he tries to, when we drive and the window is open and he's looking out and there's a cyclist coming. I've seen that often. And the cyclist, the moment the cyclist passes, he suddenly barks. And when the cyclist makes this kind of thing, that he so happily waves his tail. So apparently it makes him really happy, or finds it funny, or scared, or yeah. Okay, so basically what I'm coming is to the end of it, which is the philosopher part of the book. It's called The Dog and His Philosopher. I philosophically try to make conclusions at the end, which leads me to animal rights. Descartes, we know, René Descartes, this French mathematician of the 17th century, is a person who felt that animals can have no reason, and that is because either you have reason or you haven't. You can't have a bit reason. And since they haven't got complete reason, obviously he says, they can't have reason at all. But if animals have no reason, they can't have a free will, they can't decide things, so they must be driven. And if they're only driven, they can't have feelings. Because feelings, conscious feelings, only make sense if you conclude and have a conscious decision after that. And he's right in that aspect. But we now know from the Cambridge Declaration in 2012 that animals have conscious feelings, so they must be able to consciously decide. I conclude the other way. And one example of this conscious decision, and it actually happened like that. I give him a piece of tofu, and he says, piece of tofu, jumps there and grabs me with his teeth. And I say, ow. And then I take the next piece of tofu and gives it to me because it wasn't so bad, really. And then his instinct says, grab the tofu. This is the brainstem. And the cerebellum, the small brain, says, he gets another tofu if he bites me, so biting him is good. But then his mirror neurons say, he had felt pain. And his limbic system consciously makes him feel empathy. And his neocortex says, my value is, I don't want to hurt this guy, I want to have a good relationship with him. And so next time, he doesn't grab the tofu, but he's very careful and very slowly and takes the tofu very, very lightly. So this is an example for me where he shows this conscious decision based on his value system. And our civil law code that makes animals being things is based on Immanuel Kant's, this German philosopher's theory. What his basic idea is that humans have reason, and therefore freedom, and therefore the central moral claim is to protect this freedom. Freedom is this independence of instinct and conditional independence of the stem, brain, and the cerebellum, but being able to decide with the neocortex, really. And Kant thinks only humans have that, no animals. And what I argue now is that Kant never knew anything about dogs. He never met any. He actually never left the city of Königsberg. He stayed there all his life, so he hasn't got a clue about animals, to be honest. The fact is, and he didn't know about evolution, that came up only 70 years later. So, in fact, evolution makes the development of this reason a continuous process. Reason is not there completely or not at all, but reason starts a bit and becomes better developed. There's a bigger neocortex that enables you to have more associations, more reflection. And then at a certain point, you reach the capability of reflecting so far that you can say now you're fully responsible for your actions, so you can be tried in court, for example, for what you do. But this is a high level, because with human children, we say it's only at 16, 18, depending on the country, where this is the case. And at 16, 15, 14-year-old human youth is some creature that really reflects a lot. So it is a continuous process, and somewhere on this line there are dogs who do reflect a bit and have a bit of reason. They don't do mad things. They are reasonable in many aspects, but they can't be held fully responsible in front of a court of law. So they are limited moral beings, but moral beings nevertheless. And humans are not the complete reason beings. They haven't reason completely, because there are so many things, and even Immanuel Kant himself proved that he wasn't using his reason completely, because he claimed, for example, that it is justified, and moral theory forces us to do the death penalty. And we now all agree that this is nonsense, that the death penalty is in contrast to human rights. Human rights can't be lost because you do something, do something criminal. Human rights are attached to your freedom and cannot be taken away. And also he felt that there is a God, a Christian God, and he also defended these 10 commandments, at least the one where it says you shouldn't lie. He said, in principle, reason forces you morally to never lie under no circumstances. These are sort of conclusions that prove that he doesn't have reason completely, because otherwise he would have understood that he's actually socially formed, molded by Christianity, and then try to use his reason to justify Christianity instead of using his pure reason and coming up with pure moral, from socializing independent conclusions. So basically, Kant argues that reason makes humans able to find their own ends, so their own goals in life, if you want. And animals cannot do that. The examples are, for example, flowers turning to the sun because the goal is that they get enough sunlight. But they don't know that. They are just driven doing this. This is an external end. Spider making a net, maybe the same. But so are animals capable of consciously choosing their ends? And I say his goal, for example, to protect our relationship is a consciously chosen end. So he can define his own goals and his own values. And therefore, here's a number of such examples that I think that proves that he can do that. And using Immanuel Kant, then he's an end in himself. This is what Kant claims refers to only humans. They are ends in themselves. That means that they have a value in themselves and they don't need to be valuable for others. Whereas animals, he says, who have no autonomy, who can't choose goals themselves, they have no freedom, therefore, they are only means to human ends. So they can be used, but should be humanely used. The welfare attitude, humanely used. Whereas I conclude from the relationship with Kuksi and the natural scientific upholstering of these findings that he can choose his own ends, and therefore he is an end in himself and not the means for human ends. He has a being in his own right. So this famous categorical imperative of Immanuel Kant is treat all beings with consciousness never merely as means, also instead of all dogs, I take all with consciousness, never merely as means to your ends, but always also as ends in themselves. So this is the basis that that says if you follow that, then they cannot be property, they cannot be owned, they cannot be beings that you use for yourself, but they are subjects, and they should have rights that protect them from such usage. And yeah, I jumped that now a bit in order to save the time. The last slide, I conclude that what we need to do is establish what I call a multi-species society. Like in parallel to a multi-ethnic society, multi-species society, a society where we accept that there are so-called domesticated animals who live with us humans. We domesticated animals live together, and there are some who have these quirks, some of that quirks. We need more tolerance, we need more ability to adjust to these different lifestyles, but we need to accommodate that in society. Society should adapt to that, and so-called domesticated animals, i.e. those that cannot completely autonomously live in the wild alone, those animals should have citizen rights in our society. Basic citizen rights that protect them from being used and that make sure that they can live their life as they want it and as their autonomy tells them to, and choose those ways of life as they want to. So in close social contact to humans, but as much living their own lives as they can. And wild animals, I would argue, should be left completely to their own devices, organizing themselves. We don't know better what they should be doing, and minimizing suffering is not our cause, but they should decide themselves how they organize themselves. And yes, you can help an animal in need nevertheless, but helping means getting it back to its feet so that he or she can live their autonomous life again. So no hunting intervention in the wilderness ecosystem, but letting those animals organize themselves. That would be my conclusion based on the experience with Kuksi and based on Immanuel Kant, who is the dominant philosopher. Wherever you go in ethical philosophy, his voice is the most important one, and his voice is responsible for animals being things, being property. This was Immanuel Kant's doing. A guy who never met a dog and who always lived in a city and never saw any forest from inside. And so you can't trust that guy, because this is no basis for being able to decide these sort of things. Okay, yeah, thanks.
Bravo!
Magst du dabei rausgehen? Magst du gehen? Gehst du dabei?
No.
Okay. Yeah, does anyone have questions or comments to that?
I'm just curious about one thing. How do you know when a task that Kuksi did is higher intellectual, that puts effort in more effort or less effort? How you see this in Kuksi for some things?
I don't know, but I mean, if you are just reacting like a trained reaction, then this is a cerebellum thing, which is automatic, low energy, and very speedy. Mm-hmm. And when you have to think about something, then it takes at least seconds, if not minutes, and it's a conscious effort. It's always energetic. It needs a lot of energy. You see that when he's climbing, it's very interesting. I find that he's concentrating. And then he's standing still and concentrating, and then he's moving on, a very conscious effort. While seeing somebody moving quickly or looking at something that is going automatically. So, yeah, but I mean, if you live with somebody that close, then you sort of so get to know. I know so many things about his feelings and he about mine, much more than about many humans who will always be a miracle. Why they, for example, don't want to walk in the wilderness? Why do they love sitting in heated rooms? I can never follow that. So.
I have two comments.
Yeah.
Years ago, I started to think about this because there were people arguing that dogs and cats are stupid. But this was years ago, even years before I became vegan. So I didn't like the idea, and so somebody said to me, you know, a cat is stupid because she can't open the door. And I said, okay, but I know cats that can do that, and dogs too. Yeah. So I started thinking, why do people say either animals are stupid, or there are some geniuses who can do this very simple human task, you know? And I, you know, saying this sarcastically, I developed this concept of interest, you know, because I noticed that if animals have interest, or they develop a kind of interest, they do stuff easily, you know. Stuff that some people find remarkable, but it's not. It's just that animals decided that they find it worthy, you know. Oh, so that's just one comment, and the other comment.
Can I briefly say something to that? Yeah, I mean, I experienced with him very clearly. I never trained him opening the door And he normally doesn't open the door, but if he needs to, then he immediately does it, and he never failed to. From the beginning, basically. He saw me opening the door. And one good example also is there is this new, we changed the office and there is an entrance into the garage, and 5 meters behind the garage door inside is a little button that you pressed and you open the door. And so I went in there, opened the door, and then I went outside again, but there was some problem, so I fiddled around, and before I had finished fiddling, the door closed again automatically. And Kuksi was inside and I was outside. I said, okay, and I need to walk in again, and suddenly the door opened. Kuksi had pressed the button, and we were just 3 or 4 times in there, and he saw me pressing the button, and he realized this is how to do it, and so he pressed the button and just came out himself. Sort of no failure, there's no sort of 10 times pressing this against the wall, and like you would say it's just trial and error blindly. Not at all, just seeing me doing it himself.
So the other thing I wanted to say or share is that when I got my dog like 8-9 years ago, I didn't know much about dogs, and a friend of mine told me she was like on some courses to an animal dog psychiatrist, and she claimed to know stuff about dogs, and she said, oh, dogs are in love with routine, like you will go. You see, when after some months you go always the same path and always the same. I said, okay. And after a year or two, my dog started to, we went out of the court and he was like, oh, that way. Or maybe if in the morning he went one way, in the evening he was like, no, opposite way, and things like that. So he just chooses,
Absolutely, and this example I also always use, and it surprises people who train their dogs because they don't never know that, because they can never do it. When we walk, say I have an afternoon and we are out in the forest and he knows the area, then I ask him to go first, and then he just goes. And you would have thought this is good for the dog, this is bad for the dog, and then you let him walk, and then you realize that he goes to places you would never have expected that he would like to go there. Yeah? And there's a valley where he loves to go, I realized. This is very steep, and there's big plants in the bottom because it's so wet and so big leaves, and he loves to go through that. And I would have never thought that. I didn't like going there because it was too wet. And if he can choose, then he's so and so often goes there. And if he can choose, in an afternoon stroll, he takes 3 to 5 hours. So it's also something that I learned from him, because he then walks, and then we come back. This is then 3 to 5 hours. So yes, you can ask him, yes, he has his own idea, where to walk, how long to walk, all these things. You don't need to decide it, and if you decide, then let him as well, so that you both equal. So that, yeah, it does work. Yeah, the book is being translated to English, but it will probably take another half a year before it's finished.
Se iščemo tudi slovenskega, zdaj že nekaj, smo imeli krizo v Sloveniji, tako da počasi bo, ne, upajmo. We are looking also for Slovenian.
Really?
Yeah, publish house, yes. Sure.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well,